You know that feeling of being completely swamped by modern life? The endless notifications, the impossible number of choices, that constant nagging feeling that you're falling behind? Well, it turns out this isn't some personal failure on your part. It's actually a pretty natural response to a world that has been, in many ways, designed to be overwhelming. So let's unpack how our minds got hijacked, one little click at a time.
It really all starts with something so small, you barely even notice it. A tiny, seemingly harmless thing we all do probably almost every day. You're installing some new software, signing up for a service, and there it is, that little checkbox. You might pause for, half a second? Then you click, I agree, and you just move on with your life. You are definitely not alone.
In fact, you're in the massive majority. A study from Deloitte found that a staggering 91% of us accept legal terms and conditions without ever reading them. And look, this isn't just some funny little quirk of modern life, it's actually the perfect starting point for understanding how our world has gotten so complex, and more importantly, how that complexity is being used against us.
Okay, so let's start right there, with that little button. We see it all the time, but it's way more than just a gateway to an app. It's the first clue to this huge disconnect in our digital world.
And yeah, legal scholars see a huge problem here. When we skip over these contracts, it's not just about avoiding boring legal text. It creates two major issues. First, if you don't read it, can you really consent to it? And second, if basically nobody is reading the terms, then there's zero pressure on companies to compete by offering better terms. The whole system just kind of breaks down.
And this shows you just what can be hidden inside these things. A software company called PC Pitstop once hid a clause offering $1,000 to anyone who actually read it. It took 4 months for a single person to claim the prize. Or, on a much more serious note, Google Chrome's original terms of service granted the company a worldwide license to all the content you created through the browser. That's the kind of stuff we agree to every single day without a second thought.
But look, this behavior isn't just about us being lazy. To really understand why we do this, we have to look a little deeper. We've got to look at our own biology and how our brains are fundamentally wired to deal with information in the first place.
So, the official term for this is information overload, or sometimes you'll hear it called infobesity. It's that exact point where the amount of information you're trying to take in just completely surpasses your brain's ability to process it. And when that happens, it doesn't just feel bad. It actively leads to confusion, to stress, and to really bad decision-making. You're not failing, your cognitive circuits are literally shorting out.
And here's the fundamental reason why. The human brain didn't evolve for this environment. Not even close. It evolved to handle immediate physical threats, like a predator, followed by long periods of rest. But modern digital life, it creates this state of continuous, non-stop alertness. Notifications, emails, news alerts, the input just never stops. Our minds are simply not built to keep up with this kind of relentless barrage.
And this brings us to a super crucial point. More information is not always better. This is sometimes called the Yerkes-Dodson's law. As you get more info on a topic, your decision quality goes up, but only to a certain point. Once you pass that peak, your ability to make a good choice doesn't just level off, it absolutely plummets. Too much information actively makes us worse at making decisions.
To cope with all this, our brain kicks into survival mode. It starts taking shortcuts. We satisfies, which means we just choose the good enough option instead of trying to find the best one. We use chunking to group new, complex information with things we already know. And we fall for status quo bias, which is just a fancy way of saying we do whatever takes the least amount of mental energy. Like clicking I agree. These aren't character flaws, they're your brain's emergency brakes to prevent a total system meltdown.
But what if this feeling of overload isn't an accident? What if our brain's limits aren't just a weakness, but a target? This is where things get really intentional. This is what you might call the architecture of confusion.
The name for this is dark patterns. And as the European Parliament puts it, these aren't just bad design choices, they are deliberate tricks. They are user interfaces intentionally designed to take advantage of your cognitive shortcuts and manipulate you into doing things you didn't mean to do. And I guarantee you've seen them everywhere. Basket sneaking, where extra items just mysteriously appear in your online cart. Subscription traps, right? Where signing up is one easy click, but canceling requires you to solve a puzzle and mail 3 letters. Fake urgency, like a countdown timer that just magically resets if you refresh the page. And my personal favorite, confirm shaming, which uses phrases like, "No thanks, I hate saving money," to guilt you into opting in.
So, what does this all mean for the very idea of choice?
Well, as one legal publication puts it, in this kind of environment, the word choice isn't really a description of your freedom anymore. It's more like a legal fiction. It's a tool to make the extraction of your money, your data, and your attention seem totally legitimate. Okay, let's zoom out one last time, because this whole dynamic, this weaponized complexity, it doesn't just exist on your phone. This is a pattern that scales all the way up to our biggest and most critical societal problems.
In politics and public life, we all crave something we call common sense, these simple, obvious-sounding answers to huge problems. But the reality is that our social systems are irreducibly complex. They're nonlinear, which means a tiny change over here can have a massive, unpredictable effect way over there. They aren't simple machines, they're much more like weather systems.
And this mismatch leads to this really fascinating and frankly frustrating phenomenon known as Parkinson's law of triviality. The argument is that we consistently give a disproportionate amount of our attention to trivial issues precisely because we can actually understand them.
Parkinson's classic example of this was a committee that was tasked with two things. First, approve the incredibly complex blueprints for a new nuclear power plant. And second, approve the very simple design for the staff's bike shed. Yep, the bike shed, of course. Why? Well, because everyone can have an opinion on a bike shed. The nuclear reactor is so complex that most people feel totally unqualified to even engage. So we retreat. We go to the simple, the understandable, the trivial, even when the stakes are astronomically high on the complex issue that we're all ignoring.
And this is where it can really become a crisis. As the historian Joseph Tainter argues, societies tend to solve problems by adding more complexity, more rules, more systems, more bureaucracy, and at first this works really well. But eventually the cost of just maintaining all that complexity starts to outweigh the benefits. The system becomes fragile, top-heavy, and pretty vulnerable to collapse.
So, where does that leave us? How are we supposed to make sense of all this? How do we navigate this endless, deafening noise?
Well, this is the path that we've just traced. It all starts with a simple, almost thoughtless click on an I agree button. But that click isn't just laziness, it's driven by the very real limits of our brain's ability to process information. Those cognitive limits are then intentionally exploited by manipulative designs, and that entire dynamic reflects a much larger societal crisis, our tendency to run away from complexity, even when it's the most important thing we need to face.
And that's the bottom line here. The ultimate cost of all this engineered complexity isn't just financial, it's something far, far more valuable. The real battle is for our attention, for our focus, and for our basic ability to think clearly for ourselves.
Which leaves us with one final question to ponder. In a world that increasingly profits from your confusion, what does it truly mean to think clearly?